Welcome to BeFM Drama, where we are presenting episode 9 in a 10-part adaptation of A Study in Scarlet by Sir Arthur Conan Doyle. In this chapter of our investigation of a baffling and brutal double murder in London, the killer, Jefferson Hope, will explain to us how the murders were done in vengeance for the long-ago deaths of his would-be bride and her father in the American desert. Please join me as we return to the streets of London, Holmes and Dr. Watson, in this riveting installment of our adaptation of A Study in Scarlet. We listened in rapt attention to the words of our prisoner in his bare-walled cell, Inspector Lestrade's pencil scratching away as he recorded every word. Holmes leaned in close, his eyes fixed on Hope as the man spoke.
The men I hunted were guilty of the death of two human beings, a father and a daughter. That forfeited their lives. After the years that had passed, it was impossible to win a conviction against them in any court. But I knew of their guilt, though, and determined that I would be judge, jury, and executioner. You'd have done the same if you had any manhood in you. The girl I loved was forced to marry that dog, Drebber, and died for it. I took the ring from her finger and vowed it would be the last thing his eyes ever saw. If I die tomorrow, I'll die knowing my work is done, and done well. There's nothing left for me to hope for or desire.
For all those years, you tracked them like a hound.
That's right. They were rich, and I was poor. It wasn't easy. When I got to London, my pockets were empty. Driving and riding are as natural to me as walking, so applied at a cab owner's office, and soon had a job. It took time to learn where my targets were living. But once I did, I followed close, sometimes by cab, others by foot, but always at their heel. Oh, they were cunning. They never went out alone or after dark. Drebber was drunk half the time, but Stangerson was sharp. But I knew my hour would come. I only feared this damn thing in my chest might burst too soon.
And your chance came.
It did, at last. I was watching the place they stayed when they loaded their luggage and drove to Euston Station. I followed. I heard them ask for the Liverpool train, but they missed it, and there wouldn't be another till morning. Stangerson was worried, but Drebber seemed pleased. He told Stangerson he had business of his own to attend to, and he reluctantly agreed to separate, telling Drebber they would rendezvous at Halliday's private hotel.
And thus you had them.
I did. My plans were set. By chance, a passenger of mine had left keys to the Brixton house in my cab. I returned them the same day, but not before making a copy. Now I had access to a spot in the city I knew was secure. The only problem was getting Drebber into the house.
What happened once Drebber left Euston Station?
He went into the first bar he found. He was drunk when he came out. He hailed a cab just in front of mine, and I followed. To my surprise, the cab took Drebber back to the boarding house he had just left. He entered, and his cab drove away. After several minutes, the door was thrown open and two men appeared, Drebber and a man I'd never seen before. The man had Drebber by the neck, and when they came to the top of the steps, he kicked him into the street. The coward ran away as fast as his legs could carry him. He saw my cab, hailed me, and jumped in. "Take me to Halliday's private hotel," he said.
But you did not.
No. Let me tell you, when I had him in my cab, my heart jumped so joyfully that I feared my aneurysm might go wrong. I drove slowly, thinking what it was best to do. He solved the problem for me. His craze for drink seized him again, and he ordered me to pull up outside another bar and wait. When he came out, he was so far gone, I knew I could do what I wanted with him.
The pills?
Yes, the pills. During my wanderings, I was once a janitor at the laboratory of a university. One day, a professor gave me a lecture on poisons, and he showed his students an alkaloid so powerful that the smallest dose meant instant death. I helped myself to a sample and worked it into small pills. I put each pill in a box with a duplicate that was harmless. When the time came, my enemies would choose a pill, and I would eat the other and let God decide who died. I always had those boxes with me.
You took Drebber to the house in Lauriston Gardens.
It was a bad night. raining hard, but I was happy. So happy I could have shouted. Oh, gentlemen, you can't imagine how it felt, longing for vengeance 20 years, and suddenly finding it within reach. I lit a cigar to relax, but my hands were trembling, and my head was throbbing. I could see old John Ferrier and sweet Lucy looking at me from the darkness and smiling, plain as I see you now in this room.
What happened when you reached the house?
There was not a soul outside. I found Drebber in a drunken sleep and shook him awake. "It's time to get out," I said. He thought we'd come to the hotel. He got out without a word. He was so drunk, I had to walk beside him to keep him steady. I unlocked the door and led him into the front room.
Go on, Hope, exactly as it happened.
I struck a match and lit the candle I had brought with me. "Enoch Drebber," I said to him, holding the light to my face. "Who am I?" Oh, his face. For a moment, he gazed at me with bleared, drunken eyes. And then I saw the horror spread, the sweat breaking out on his face and his teeth chattering.
And then?
I laughed and laughed and laughed. "You dog," I yelled. "Your wanderings have come to an end." He shrunk away from me as I spoke, and I could see he thought I was mad. Perhaps I was. The pulse in my head beat like a sledgehammer. I could hear the blood rushing in my ears. And then suddenly, a dam burst, and it gushed from my nose in a flood. "What do you think of Lucy Ferrier now?" I cried. "Punishment has been slow in coming, but it has found you at last." I saw his lips tremble. "Would you kill me?" he stammered. "There is no murder here," I answered. "Who speaks of murdering a mad dog? What mercy had you upon my poor darling when you dragged her from her slaughtered father and bore her away to your shameless harem?" I thrust the pillbox before him. "Let high God judge between us. Choose and eat. There is death in one and life in the other. I shall take what you leave. Let us see if there is justice upon the earth, or if we are ruled by chance."
You mean to say that he took the poison willingly?
Willingly enough, once I held my knife to his throat. I took the other pill, and we stood facing one another in silence, waiting to see who would live and who die. I shall never forget the look on his face when the first pain told him the poison was in his system. I laughed and held Lucy's ring in front of his eyes. It was only for a moment. The action of the poison is rapid, you see. He threw his hands out, staggered, and fell dead on the floor.
Tell me exactly what you did next. I must confirm my deductions.
The blood had been streaming from my nose, but I took no notice. I felt lighthearted and cheerful. I remembered a German socialist found killed in New York with Raha written up above him, and guessed that what puzzled New Yorkers would puzzle Londoners. So I dipped my finger in my own blood and wrote it on the wall. Then I walked to my cab and drove away. The rain washed much of the blood from my face and hands. I had driven from distance before I had reached for Lucy's ring and found it wasn't there. I was horrified. That ring was all I had of her. I drove back. I left my cab in a side street and went up to the house, where I walked straight into the arms of a police officer coming the other way. I only managed to escape by pretending to be hopelessly drunk, which I was in a way.
And thus, Enoch Drebber came to his end.
Stangerson was all that was left to pay off John Ferrier's debt. I watched this hotel all day, but he never emerged. He must have suspected something. He was cunning, Stangerson. But if he thought he could keep me off by staying indoors, he was mistaken. I found out which window was his, and early next morning, took a ladder lying in the lane behind the hotel and made my way into his room in the dark. I woke him gently and described Drebber's death to him, giving him the same choice of pills. But instead of taking a chance at life, he leapt from the bed and went for my throat. I had my knife ready and stabbed him through the heart. But the outcome would have been the same in either case. God himself would never have allowed his guilty hand to pick any but the poison pill. There's little more to say. I went on cabbing, and one day a dirty youngster asked for a cabbie named Jefferson Hope. He said my cab was needed by a gentleman at 221B Baker Street. I drove, and the next thing I knew, this man here had handcuffs on my wrist. There's my story, gentlemen. You may consider me a murderer, but I hold myself to be as much an officer of the law as you.
There's one last thing I wish to know. Who was your accomplice who came for the ring I advertised?
I can tell my own secrets, but I won't get anyone else in trouble. I saw your advertisement, and I thought it could either be a trap or the ring I wanted. My friend volunteered to find out. I think you'll own he did it smartly.
No doubt of that.
Gentlemen, this prisoner will be brought before the magistrates within a week, and your testimony will be required. Until then, I'm responsible for him.
Lestrade rang a bell as he spoke, and Hope was led away to the cells. Holmes and I made our way out of the station and took a cab back to Baker Street in silence. Now we know how the murder was done, and, like Holmes and Watson, we gather in silence around the power of Jefferson Hope's account. From BeFM Drama, this is your host, Joshua Cornwell.